If you can lead an independent life, then go ahead and do it and keep fighting. But if you're stuck in a situation where you have no freedom, then you have to make a change. And my change will come with death.
For weeks, he was the center of media attention. His life and death drama played out in the most intense public fashion before millions of Metro Detroiters and carried across the country by the national press. But in the years preceding, he had lived with increasing isolation, his quadriplegia walling him off from the world outside his nursing home room, his life dependent upon a machine that forced him to breathe, his spirit thirsting for meaningful human contact. So earlier this summer, as the nation was celebrating its birth and renewing its central values of freedom, independence, and the will of the people, 38-year-old David Rivlin began fighting with unswerving determination for what he described as his own personal freedom, his right to die.
That you have a choice, that you don't have to take everything that's dished out to you, and that a person should have a choice if he lives or dies.
Tonight, our purpose is not to debate the ethics or morality of David's choice. Instead, we'll attempt to answer the question, who is David Rivlin? And what was his life really like, both before and after the accident that paralyzed him from the neck down? For years as a quadriplegic, he led an active life, going to school, falling in love, and getting engaged to be married. So what happened to David to make him decide he no longer wanted to live? And what, if anything, might we have done to encourage David to continue choosing life? Tonight, we'll also meet some other remarkable people who are in situations similar to David's, but whose choices are both different and inspiring.
My life is very centrally dependent on my being able to express myself.
Hello, I'm Art Humphrey. As the abilities reporter here at WDIV, I was assigned to cover the David Rivlin story. In doing so, I came to know David in a way few people ever knew him. In fact, it was one of the most intense relationships of my life. We had only 2 weeks to share a lifetime. David gave me the privilege of conducting his final interview, and I want to share that with you this evening. David Rivlin had a profound impact on me as a man and as a reporter that will last the rest of my life. He reminded me once again of the vital importance of human contact and the value of reaching out to others, perhaps less fortunate than ourselves.
WDIV is proud to present this Time to Care special, along with our partners United Way for Southeastern Michigan and United Community Services. Tonight's Time to Care special is brought to you by Chrysler Corporation, AAA Michigan, the Pepsi-Cola Company, and Comerica. They, along with WDIV, urge you to take the time to care.
We're all gonna die. And we better get used to that fact and realize that life is worth living as long as there is more than mere survival.
I first met David Rivlin earlier this summer after he had petitioned the Oakland County Circuit Court to allow a doctor to sedate him and then disconnect him from the respirator that was keeping him alive. During the 2 weeks I got to know David, we had several conversations that challenged some of my most basic assumptions about life and forced me to carefully reconsider cherished beliefs. As in all important relationships, getting to know David was also a process of self-discovery.
You were born in Los Angeles in 1950. I'm an only child.
David's parents were Ephraim and Rachel Rivlin. He was a prison psychologist and she was a teacher. And what David describes as a typical childhood, he grew up feeling closer to his mother. But when David was 11, his parents went through a bitter divorce, and a year later, David lost his mother to cancer. He lived for a while with his father in California, but their relationship was strained, and David came to Michigan in the late 60s to live with his aunt. He graduated from Oak Park High School in 1968, where he participated in school plays and was a member of the debate team. But David headed west again in 1969. Like many 19-year-old kids, he grew his hair long, protested against the war in Vietnam, and rebelled against authority. The unrest of the late 60s helped shape his personality.
I just don't like being told what to do. I'm trapped in a nursing home where I'm told pretty much what to do. I have to follow a regimen, and I don't want to. And do that for 20, 30 years.
Describe in detail a typical day in the nursing home for you and why you cannot go on with that type of life.
Nothing goes on. It's just dead zone.
Elaborate. What do you mean? Nothing goes on, it's dead
You
zone.
watch TV. Listen to the radio. Eat your meals. Take your pills. That's it. No career. No family. No wife, no children. Empty life.
When I asked David where he'd live if given his fondest wish, he said he'd go back to a kibbutz in Israel.
It was very peaceful. Farm life is like that. And I enjoyed the feeling of family.
As a teenager, David had spent time on a kibbutz, and at 19, he was saving his money to return again, when his life was changed suddenly and forever, one day on a beach in California. He was surfing. When tossed by a wave, he landed on his head and broke his neck.
After you hit the water and you saw your hand floating in front of you, what did you do?
I bit it and couldn't feel anything. I knew what I had done.
David's accident left him paralyzed in a wheelchair, but that didn't stop him from pursuing his dreams. He eventually returned to school at Oakland University here in suburban Detroit and worked toward a degree in philosophy with the hope of teaching one day. He met and fell in love with a young woman. They lived together for a time and planned to marry.
Yeah, I came close once, but the woman couldn't take the burden of the quadriplegia. Well, I thought I could have a family. I could have the things I wanted. And it didn't pan out.
Over the past 18 years of his quadriplegia, a lot of things did not pan out for David Rivlin. His disability and his isolation grew only more profound as he underwent 8 different operations. It's the kind of increasing debilitation to which Jim Newbacher is intimately acquainted. In his Detroit Free Press column, Jim has been fighting for the rights of people with disabilities, while at the same time waging a more personal battle with his own condition. This is Jim Newbacher in 1985, going to his office at the Free Press.
This tape is for Jim Newbacher's column.
This is Jim Newbacher today, writing his column, Disabled in Detroit, from his bed, using a tape recorder instead of a typewriter. Diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 10 years ago, Jim knows what it's like to have your health and your body slowly chipped away. But his work helps to keep his spirit alive.
My life is very centrally dependent on my being able to express myself. I get feedback from that. I get support from that.
But many times a disability can isolate people like David Rivlin from the rest of society.
Unfortunately, David Rivlin's life has gotten to the point where he's an orphan, social orphan. He really doesn't have any regular support system. And I value that a whole lot in my own life.
While he understands David's request, Jim doesn't think others should be encouraged to do the same.
We shouldn't go around saying, oh, you're so handicapped, you really ought to consider killing yourself. I mean, our social policy ought to be the opposite. We should say, here's what we can do for you to make life more worthwhile. more fulfilling.
As we'll see again and again tonight, the presence of a support system is vitally important to many seniors and people with disabilities. Often, volunteers can play a major role in maintaining that system.
If you would like more information about volunteer opportunities with seniors and people with disabilities, please call TELHELP at 226-9888 during business hours. Please take the time to care.
I'm trapped in a nursing home where I'm told pretty much what to do. I have to follow a regimen. And I don't want to. And do that for 20, 30 years.
During the 18 years David Rivlin battled with his quadriplegia, he suffered many indignities, including attendants who stole money from him, physically abused him, and once left him all night to lie in his own vomit. But it was only the last 2 years that David came to feel he had lost control of his life. The bed in room 207 of the Oak Hill Care Center in Farmington Hills had become his home and almost his entire world. His life had become dependent on a ventilator that forced air into his lungs. Beyond occasional visits from a handful of family members and friends, radio and TV were his only contact to the world outside his room. His father, with whom David had never been close, died 2 years ago, ironically, while on a ventilator. In one of our conversations, David told me he was simply tired of the way he had to live.
What exactly are you tired of?
Not being able to move. The dependency on other people to do everything for me. Plus a ventilator. I hate machines that are attached.
David's dependence on a ventilator came with the last of his 8 operations.
I had an aneurysm in my spinal cord that would have affected my breathing, so I had an operation and it knocked out my breathing. And now I'm on a vent. Just put me through 2 years of hell.
Why was it 2 years of hell? Was it just the ventilator alone, or was it the social isolation? What made it hell?
You said it. Social isolation.
How do you view society's attitude toward people with disabilities?
It sucks. And transportation. Attitude. Financial help. It's all bad.
While Oakland Circuit Court Judge Hilda Gage considered David's plea to be disconnected from his hated ventilator and allowed to die, many people in the disabled community followed the case with intense interest. One of those I talked with was 26-year-old Brian DeMar, who suffered a gunshot wound to the spine on July 6, 1986.
I was hit. Enough like this.
Brian is paralyzed from the neck down and needs a respirator in order to breathe. His physical condition is identical to David Rivlin's.
I know partially some of the agony, some of the pain he's been through, and a lot of frustration.
But Brian is able to cope with those frustrations with the help of a strong support system. His mother, Mary, is always close by. Friends stop by to visit, and twice a week he's able to get out of bed and out of the house with the use of a portable respirator.
Just lucky to be here. And this so-called accident must have a meaning to it.
I asked Jim Newbacher to describe a good support system.
A friend who would walk in on Tuesday morning and say, "Hey, Dave, did you see the Pistons the other night? Wasn't that a great game? Let me read you some of the paper, Dave, and here's some mail. You want to write a letter? I'll write it. You just tell me, I'll write it for you, mail it for you." That kind of system of friends or siblings or parents.
Unfortunately, for too long, David Rivlin did not have the kind of support system he needed. He did not have enough family, friends, or volunteers to provide regular stimulation, encouragement, and love to keep him connected with the world and other human beings, the kind of relationships that give our lives meaning. As we'll see later, when David's story was publicized, hundreds of offers came pouring in, but by then, David had already lost his will to live. Still tonight, there are many others in situations similar to David's who long for the kind of connection and support you might provide.